that they're changing my voice. So now a lot of people complain about homelessness in various ways. The right wing likes to lead the charge to complain about the fact that the left and really the whole government doesn't do a good job when it comes to spending money to solve homelessness in a cost-effective and logical way. The left wing quite often argues that there should be more spending for homelessness, and then some of them argue that there shouldn't. And in recent years, it's made it so that the left, which is where any hope for America lies, has been losing ground. So when I came across this mayor from Lancaster who has conservative beliefs, to say the least, he might very well be a Republican, he said that from his religion, which is, it's implied that it's Christianity, that if you don't work, you don't eat. He went as far as to say that God said, if you don't work, you don't eat. Okay, as if it's that simple. So now let's look at the case of somebody who's been kidnapped as a result of the system failing to make it so that it was very unlikely for them to get kidnapped. Instead, you have this country like America or other countries where people get kidnapped all the time, and so they get kidnapped. And now they're in a basement, and they say to them, you know, if you don't prostitute yourself, you don't eat. Or they just starve them and say, hey, if you don't work, you don't eat. That's a very dramatic example and point of reference of why they're wrong. Now, some people would say, well, not everyone is tied up. You know, not everyone who's poor, who doesn't want to work, is tied in the basement. And there you go. And that's being a smart aleck. That's being a fool. That's being somebody who's deliberately trying to miss the solution. And it's important to highlight that there's people like that, because that's a huge part of the problem here. They obstruct justice. It's part of their philosophy for them to obstruct justice. Now, I want you all to pause this video and get a pen and a piece of paper. I'm going to have you write down like 7 or 8 things or so. The first thing I want you to write down is obstruction of justice. The second thing I want you to write down is the word philosophy, and put a number 1 by the philosophy. So write obstruction of justice and the number 1, then philosophy after the number 1. My first official point here will be that the reason why people do not want to work starts with, but is not limited to, philosophy. Point number 2. The second reason why people do not want to work, those who do not want to work, that is the pre-existing situation. They look at the world and say, hey, maybe they're a colored person, maybe it's racist, maybe they're from a single-parent home and their single parent is addicted to drugs, maybe they get sexually abused. They look at the situation and say maybe it's hopeless. And one way or another, they are greatly discouraged, and it leads them to not want to work. A huge part of the pre-existing situation is the exact nature of work. There's a lot of different ways that people can work. You can work part-time, you can work full-time, you can work in a cubicle, you can work as a lifeguard, you can work in construction, you can work, in the food industry, what have you. You can win the lotto, start a business. So when it comes to their philosophy, and when it comes to the pre-existing situation, they're already at a disadvantage. And the governing class, and a lot of these guys are from old money, they're from families that have been governing for a long time, from very privileged groups that have been governing for a long time, privileged whites, Jewish people, and LGBT people, and in more recent history, some token minorities, maybe they're crypto this or that, have been added to their ranks. Okay. So now point number 3. Put the word home, their home life. What is it like in their home? Is it conducive for studying? Is it conducive for thinking? Do they encourage them to be innovative and come up with solutions? Okay. Point number 4 is school. How is the school system structured? How is it structured? Now, if you're a Christian, you're given the spirit of sound judgment, like it says in Paul's letters, a spirit of discernment, of sound judgment, of discipline, a spirit of determination, a spirit that makes you analytical. Certainly, before you would say something as simple and oversimplified as if you don't work, you don't eat, certainly you would have considered at least these first 4 points, right? Philosophy. Okay, maybe a Christian philosophy, maybe not. The pre-existing situation, home and school. They brought up, in the news, and they've been talking about it recently, that we spend like over 2.5 times more per student than every country in the world, than any country in the world. So certainly there's a problem when it comes to school. So if we're spending all this money and you're complaining about DEI and CRT in the school system, certainly you can admit that there's a problem in the school. So how can you at one moment talk about, hey, these schools are garbage, and in another moment argue that if you don't work, you don't eat, and that's all there is to it? That's stupid, right? That's ignorant. And in a country where most adults have a college degree, okay, it is very, very, very ignorant to chop it up to that. So you made it to calculus in college. Say you've taken advanced chemistry or whatever. Economics, political science, psychology. How could your political party commonly propagate the despicable falsehood that it's as simple as if you don't work, you don't eat? An argument that I've heard in my life for around 4 decades, 40 years. And to this day, they haven't corrected their obvious mistake. Their churches, 380,000 churches, haven't corrected it. Tens of millions of Republicans haven't corrected it. Their leadership hasn't corrected it. And the left hasn't perfectly addressed it. Here I am addressing in this video in a way that I've just, I just wrote down these ideas, a few minutes ago before this video, and I decided to make a video. I didn't even write this down in a way that is highly organized. And I'm definitively proving them wrong. So how could that be? How could a society that could have corrected itself easily in a matter of minutes, long, long ago, that propagates despicable falsehoods like that, argue that it's as simple as if you don't work, you don't eat? And they never even bothered to address the argument of a living wage. There's people who are homeless who do work, and to some degree they still don't eat. Okay. So we're at point number 5, I believe. So point number 5, put culture. Culture is part of the problem. When people say things like, we want to keep it that way, and they don't explain it to you, it's likely to piss you off. When there's a culture of sexual harassment in the workplace, it's likely to piss you off. As you look at so many things, like the grains of sand on the beach, you know that there's a lot of them, but you don't know how many of them there are. But in this case, you know that they're working against you and making you want to give up. There's a reason why so many people are diagnosed with mental illness, especially depression, okay, because they're looking at this hopeless situation, this train wreck called the American economy, where there's all kinds of failed cultures. Some of these failed cultures are urban ghetto cultures. A lot of them are middle-class cultures, but first and foremost, the main cultures that hold you down and make it so you don't want to work if you don't want to work are the cultures of the governing class, the kleptocratic class, the oligarchs, what have you. So, when we look at these 5 points, and they're very potent points, already, even if the person doesn't have any friends, they're in bad shape. Good luck overcoming that, especially if your physiology makes it so you're more susceptible to wanting to give up. And whose fault is that? Well, they used to breed slaves. They've controlled who lived and died for many years now. People who don't conform to their satanic system are thrown into a meat grinder. In their own Bible, it says Satan is the head of the world. He's leading the world in the secular sense, leading the governments, leading the churches. Okay. Narrow is the way to life, broad is the way to destruction, but apparently that doesn't matter. All that matters is if you don't work, you don't eat. It doesn't matter. There's complex psychological operations at play here. People are targeted as individuals, as groups, and types of people. So point number, where are we at? Point number 6 with the friends. And point number 7 is that people are targeted as individuals, as groups, and as types of people. Oh man, is that the case? So in the 1920s or so, there was about 5 or 6 million members of the Klan. 100,000 of them marched on D.C. around that time. The sole purpose of the Klan, basically, right, the main purpose, if not the sole purpose, was to run psychological operations on people and to control the social order, just like it is with fraternities. College frats historically ran what you might call psychological operations on people, and they were there on record, right? People have analyzed this thing as part of their job, have come to that conclusion. On record, their job was to keep people down. People of color, people who are white, you name it. So at first, people of color were not allowed into college. And then when they were allowed into college, they had to face the same fraternities that held down people who were white, who were allowed into college but weren't as privileged as the other white people who were allowed into college when people of color weren't. And so there's various things that were coming into play here. Historically, law enforcement acted as social controllers. They wouldn't just arrest people or give people tickets. They'd also try to discourage them from hanging out in certain places. So you had law enforcement, you had fraternities, and you had the Klan and other social clubs and hate groups that were actively trying to make sure that people were held down. So if you're looking at a society that is built on many years of this kind of activity, and you're looking at a society where the Klan basically took off their robes but maintained their activities and watered it down in some cases in terms of burning crosses to some degree, probably not to that much of a degree, I don't know, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it's safe to say they harass people to this day, and they don't always say, hey, by the way, I'm in the Klan. And people who used to be in the Klan, who just became Freemasons and joined other clubs and groups of friends and, maybe biker gangs or prison gangs or whatever, they don't say, hey, by the way, we used to be in the Klan, or my father was in the Klan. But those shared cultural values continued. And we see, and a lot of people don't want to think about this. It's very disheartening to think about it. But when we're looking at urban gangs of minority gangs and prison gangs, they often collaborate with the state and the white racist gangs. They have understandings. They have shared business. It's out there. It's in the prison gang documentaries on YouTube, okay, that they do business together to some degree. And there's an understanding that if the minority gangs become too political in a way that's uncontrolled, that they're going to crack down on them. And in some cases, that means giving the white prison gangs the upper hand against them in terms of riots and in terms of, the business that they do behind bars, smuggling drugs in, male prostitution, what have you, extortion. And so they don't want to lose power. They want to stay relevant. So they collaborate with the state and the CIA and so on and so forth. They collaborate with the hate groups and the social clubs and law enforcement, on and on and on. Okay? And that creates a network of control. And as a result, when people come into this world, then they see the existing philosophies that confuse them about the philosophy they should have. They see the pre-existing situation. Okay, they see their home life, they see the school, they see the culture, they see the friends pressuring them, and they see that people are targeted as individuals, groups, and types of people. Okay, in ways that go, there's more ways than I even know of, and I've been looking into this thing for quite some time. There's substances in the food. They push on processed food on them. They push cultures that involve substance abuse on them. Who's allowed to seem cool and who isn't. For example, there used to be hundreds and hundreds, thousands of African martial artists who came to America and to South America, to the Americas, during the transatlantic slave trade. Where are they now, right? They were people who had moral codes. They would have been the coolest people around. Okay? I'm an African martial artist, basically. From the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. I'm something that's more specific than that. My kingdom is not this world. And I'm the coolest person out there, really. If you were to compare me in my best picture to anybody in their best picture, you would clearly see that I transcend them. There'd be a bigger gap between me and the next person, all cockiness aside, I'm not cocky, than the Black Panther as a cartoon character and the Simpson characters. There will be a big gap, universally speaking. But instead, you have gang members and thugs and token minorities, and they're driving Mercedes, and they're wearing cool outfits historically, while everyone else is sabotaged more, and the clothing available is there to uphold the pre-existing system. Now, with all these things considered, can you imagine me someone who's a mayor? No offense to that mayor. You imagine me someone who's a political scientist, somebody who's some kind of government person or some church leader or whatever, and you chop it up to if you don't work, you don't eat, and that's all there is to it? People run psychological operations for a reason, because they work to some degree, right? There's whole units in the military, countless units in the military that are psychological operations units. Now, why have these units in the military that emphasizes efficiency? If they don't work, if they don't hold people down, if they don't bring people down, why have them? How can anyone sit there and pretend that military-grade psychological operations that are being run now, right now, using military personnel, using civilian personnel on a large scale, and everyone knows it? You can say, well, prove it. What do you mean prove it? You can look up COINTELPRO. How extensive was COINTELPRO? How extensive was the Ghetto Informant Program? The history of the Klan, the Klan still, there's like 20,000 members of the Klan right now. Last I checked, it was 10,000, but they said that many people have joined them. There's thousands of hate groups in America. There's like 1,000 documented hate groups, and there's many more that are undocumented. How can you pretend like that doesn't factor in? How can you pretend the economic disparity and the accompanying mental states don't factor in? You're running military-grade psychological operations on people. So there's a little more to it than if you don't work, you don't eat. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Would you want them to play stupid about it? If you were the victim of that to the point where you're homeless and on fentanyl or something? That which you didn't do for the least of my brethren, you didn't do for me. Your religion teaches you to tell the truth about these things and to be willing to die on the drop of a hat rather than to do the devil's work.